Hi everyone, welcome to this video tutorial for Asteroids. Asteroids is part of the arcade series, which is a bundle of Max for Live devices, all inspired by retro arcade games. So this is the first one, based on the classic arcade game Asteroids. It's a generative sequencer, so you pop it before an instrument, anything you want, sampler, synthesizer, drum rack, and it will generate notes for you in an interesting way. So let's have a look at it. It works with push. It will work with LaunchPad as well. That's coming out soon, and there'll be updates for a few other controllers. Essentially anything with an 8x8 grid. That's how it works. So if we have a look at the device itself, the first thing you'll want to do when you pop it on a channel is choose the control surface. So each version of the device will have the name that it works with. So this particular device works with push, and then there'll be a separate version for LaunchPad. So you just need to choose push here, and you'll get a green light there to indicate that's correct. If you try to choose a LaunchPad, it will go red and you just know you picked the wrong one. It does work in standalone mode as well. So there's a standalone version. This one actually works in standalone as well, but the standalone version has less of the push content in it, so it's a bit lighter. So choosing push, and it will take over initially the button matrix and a few other controls on the push control surface. So what we have over here is a global section, and the global section controls, it sends out parameters to the individual asteroids. So you've got 8 asteroids, and the best way to think of each asteroid is that it's like a sequencer. So if I just start the first one and play back live, you'll see we get this blue dot moving up and down, and the same on push, and that essentially is an asteroid, and it's a little sequencer that is running. We can control various things with the asteroid, so we can go into the menu and change things like the rate that it plays back, so it's slower or faster, and again we can do this on push. So if you just choose the device and then go in, you've got 7 banks, and there's some basic controls on the top to do with MIDI and some other bits that I'll go for in a moment. But if you go to bank 2, we can control the rate, so we can make it slower. So I've tried to put most of the controls on push that that you'd need to just, if you wanted to use it in performance, so you don't need to be going to the mouse. So rate, we can also control the style. So the style is what really gives each asteroid, or the generative sequencer, it's the way it works really. So let me give you an example. If I go into one of these, the minute we're in replay, and what replay will do is it will just keep going, counting either up or down, and then repeating. If I choose yo-yo, you can see now it bounces back and forth, it counts up and then down. If I choose classic, so classic will work a bit like a classic step sequencer, and it'll count through each row of 8 steps sequentially and then come back to the start again. There's a few other modes in here. The best, rather than going through them all on the tutorial, best thing to do is check the manual, and in the manual it explains what all these sections do, and it gives you a diagram as to the different modes and indicates how the asteroids move around the grid. So the idea is, when asteroids move around and there's more than one going, let's switch this back to replay. If I get another one on the go now, and I'll count this up. So I've got a pad instrument synthesizer here, and what's happening is when the 2 asteroids meet, they're generating a note. So the note they generate is depending on whereabouts they meet on this grid. So if you imagine push has 64 pads, if an asteroid meets here, it potentially could trigger the lowest note, and if it meets here, it could trigger the highest note, and it would go in that kind of motion. And then we can change this mode if we want to. So rather than just have one layout of where all the notes are mapped to, use this grid section here, and you can choose horizontal, spiral, vertical, positive and negative. So positive means the lowest note will start here and it goes up from left to right, and the highest note ends there. If you choose minus, it inverts it, so the lowest note starts there and we go down, highest note ends at the bottom. Vertical does a similar thing, but it starts there, goes up, and then spiral will start in the middle with the lowest note, and then they'll spiral out. So what you'll get if you choose different styles for each asteroid, and they're all moving around and hitting each other at different places, that's where you're going to get different notes being generated. Let me give you an example. I'm also using the arrow keys on the push to start the asteroids. You can see some little arrows here. So if I choose an arrow left on this one is not active yet, as we can see. And we can see it starts left. But I can also control this with push. So you can see that push changes the direction of the next asteroid that is to be launched. So at the moment these are all in replay. This is essentially going to recreate the same sequence again and again. If you want to randomize it a little bit, you can either go individually into the different asteroids, change either their style or their rate, or you could use the global controls. So the global controls in linked mode, these global controls here directly affect all the parameters here. So if I change the rate of all of these to 4, it affects everything. And if I change all of the styles to random, this will randomize the row and the column and the direction at the end of a count. And we can also shift all of the asteroids in one direction momentarily, like that. We can also do this with push. If you hold down shift, you'll see the arrow buttons flashing, and then pressing 1 will temporarily shift everything in that direction until it gets to the end. Basically the asteroids, whenever they get to the edge, they restart whatever it is they're doing depending on the style that you've chosen. In individual mode, the global controls are disabled and we can only use the parameters over here with the asteroids. And then in global mode you'll see that these parameters are disabled, and what's happening is if we change something here now, it writes the information directly to the asteroid's engine but without affecting the parameters here. And what that means is we could make some changes here, go back to linked mode, and we still haven't changed the settings here. So if I was to turn this one off and on again, it comes back in at 8th notes. Linked mode is probably the preferred mode. You can very easily flick between the two. Also, if you want to randomize it further, we do have a random button over here. So clicking random will randomize all the settings within the 8 asteroid parameters. This can be a nice way to find some interesting rhythms or melodies without having to go in the menus constantly. We can turn all of the asteroids off here. And another feature that's been added is a little indicator for the active asteroids. So now as I start them, we get the pink buttons at the top, and these take over the state buttons there. So as I add more, they come in, and we can turn these off individually. And when you trigger the pads again, it will always count from the lowest one up. And if you carry on triggering, you essentially will be re-triggering the first asteroid from the position you're holding. So if I trigger this now, it will populate all of them across here. So you can constantly keep interacting with it and changing the position of asteroids if you want to. So onto some MIDI then. We have some MIDI controls over here. So let's get a few asteroids playing. So first of all we can choose the scale. have some of these controls on push as well. We can choose the velocity of all of the notes that are being generated as a result of asteroids meeting. We can randomize the velocity. We can control the chance. By default this is 100%, and this is the chance of when two asteroids meet or more, if they will actually generate a note. So setting it to 0, we get nothing. Bring it in. And this is a nice way of just varying the amount of data that's coming out of the device. As you probably saw before, when you have lots of asteroids running with random settings, it can be quite full and you might want to scale it back a bit. That can be nice in performance as well if you just want to ease it down. We can also choose the length of the notes that are being generated and sent to the instrument. We can control the tonic and the octave. And then finally with MIDI we can control the range. So what the range does is, if we have it set to 6 and I'm working in, let's say, C in minor pentatonic, the notes that are being generated are 6 semitones from C on this octave in minor pentatonic. It won't generate any more. So increasing the range effectively means you're widening the keyboard, or the amount of semitones that can be generated. So if you want to get really wide ranges, set the octave quite low and then increase the range. And you'll get a mixture of very low notes, medium and very high notes. And again, this can be a really nice performance tool. This is controlled by the note range percentage slider on push to fluctuate between a wider range of notes that are being generated. One more thing on MIDI. At the bottom of the list of scales, you'll see user mode. In user mode, you can now use the little keyboard. If there's a scale that you can think of that isn't in here, you can just enter the notes. So essentially you're picking which notes out of the first octave, or 12-note octave, are present in the scale. And by entering these, it will populate the list inside the device, and the asteroids will be generated within your user specified scale. And everything here is savable with presets as well. So if you make a scale that you like, just click save here and save the preset. And the same parameters apply even to user mode. Okay, onto the Ghost Machine then. So what the Ghost Machine does is, it was a way of solving a problem of potentially with certain instruments there not being enough notes being generated. 8 asteroids is enough to play with in the way that they work with, but this is a quick way and an interesting way of generating additional notes. So what it does is it looks at the notes that are being generated, it looks at the position where they are, where they've been generated, and it will generate ghost notes, and the ghost notes have a position on the grid. And remember, where a note is generated on the grid determines what the actual note is. So the asteroids generate a note on the grid, and there's a few different modes here. So we have the first mode where if a note is generated in the bottom left corner of the, let's say the first quarter, then the ghost note is generated here, which would be in the bottom left of the top right corner. If I choose this mode, if 2 asteroids meet and a note's generated down in the bottom left corner, the ghost note is generated in the top right corner, and so on. And then there's a shuffle mode which just randomizes it completely. The ghost notes all go through the same scale as well, but they do have their individual transpose, chance, velocity, random velocity and length. And this can be really nice if you have an instrument, for example, that has that's capable of playing longer notes. And you've got some short notes being generated here, but you can generate longer notes with the ghost notes. You can lower the velocity so they come out quieter, and if you have something with some velocity sensitive filtering, you can get some really nice effects with this. We can generate the ghost notes at a delay, so they run at a slight delay to the main notes being generated. So if I choose 2, and you'll see these in pink on both the graphical user interface here and also on push. Let's switch them down an octave. And just by changing the mode of the ghost notes with the grid will give you some different outcomes. If you combine this with changing the grid for the main notes, you can get some interesting effects. And I've also put in a little random feature, and what the random feature does is it essentially generates a very slow LFO that randomizes the menu for the main grid. Okay, onto static mode. So static mode, again, it's another way of getting more notes and having a different control over the device. So let me start some asteroids again. So they're not clashing at the moment. But if I turn on static mode with the power button, I then want to go into edit mode. With edit mode, you can also toggle this with the select button on push. So with edit mode active, hitting a pad will generate a static asteroid, which is orange, and it doesn't move, but the interaction is the same, meaning when another asteroid collides with it, it will generate a note at that position. You can generate as many static asteroids as you like. This is a nice way of getting some sort of stability in either a melody or something, in that you can position particular asteroids that stay at the same point, so they'll generate the same note when they're triggered. Again, static mode all runs through the same scales and MIDI settings. You can click the trash button to delete any static asteroids. So this can be really interesting, just drawing in shapes, I find, on push. Okay, so that's working with a synthesizer. Asteroids can also work with drums. It has a drum mode. If I just flick over to this track that has a drum rack on it, down here we have the 2 modes. By default, it's in keys mode. Change it to drums, and the interface for the Ghost machine changes. The Ghost machine effectively becomes deactivated. What we have in drums mode then is the asteroids change how they work. They still move around in the same way. You have exactly the same control over them. But instead of generating a note based on where they meet on this grid, the notes are fixed, meaning asteroid 1 is assigned C1, asteroid 2 is assigned C sharp 1. We can change this. You can just click and you can change any of these notes. And again, this can all be stored in a preset. So if you do make some changes and you, for example, assign these according to a particular drum rack, you can save that with a preset. So what's going to happen now? If I focus on the first two, I'll start this off. Let me just reset everything. And if I bring in the second asteroid, you can see we're generating the kick and we're generating the snail click or whatever that is. Okay, so that could be interesting. You can do some interesting stuff there. You can have all the asteroids moving around. If I set them all going, randomize them. You can make some interesting stuff, but the initial idea for this is to use it with a little bit of generative sort of sequencing and some more traditional step sequencing. So again, let me just reset everything. Where the drum mode becomes really powerful is if you use it in combination with the static asteroids. So what we can do here is I can go for let's go for static. So again, drawing patterns with the static asteroids, see them a little bit like generating your own step sequencer grid. And I guess the difference of how asteroids work is it is the actual moving asteroid that generates the notes. It's kind of reversed. So drawing in some notes, some asteroids, sorry, and I'm going to go to the style for the first asteroid, change it to classic, and let's start that playing back. And this will just run through, and we could change these. And what we can do now with the next note is start it a bit faster. Change the note to something like a hi-hat. And now we can change things like velocity, random velocity, and the chance of each individual asteroid. And again, we can do this on push. So I can make the velocity for this hi-hat a bit quieter. I can randomize the velocity a little bit. And I can also bring down the chance of it actually generating a note. I'm just going to go to the next one and put some similar settings in. Let's start this one coming down. So one thing that will happen is the drums are, or the notes that are triggering the drum rack are being triggered whenever a moving asteroid meets with a static one, but also when it meets with another asteroid. That can be cool. You might find some interesting things, but if you do want to specifically just have asteroids generating notes when they hit a static asteroid, just turn on solo, and this will only generate notes when moving asteroids meet with static ones. They won't generate if they hit two moving asteroids meet each other, for example. You can use more than one Asteroid device at the same time. So I can just go back to track number 1. And you can switch between Asteroids, between tracks with Asteroids on. You can continue to use live as you would with MIDI tracks, audio tracks, session view. Just click notes to go back to seeing the actual Asteroid device. For a more detailed explanation of everything in the device, I would strongly recommend checking out the manual that you can download from Isotonic. And again, there will be an update coming out soon for LaunchPad and LaunchPad PRO.